Muy buenas tardes, ¿cómo están? Les damos la más cordial bienvenida a un domingo más en el marco de Expert Views en Empodérate, tú puedes. El día de hoy tenemos, como cada domingo, un invitado especial, un invitado de talla internacional, que en honor al mes de junio y al hombre, pues hemos invitado a un caballero que va a compartir con nosotros, como todos los domingos, temas muy interesantes de negocio para ustedes. También me acompaña el día de hoy Adriana Rodríguez, fundadora de este emprendimiento, de esta gran empresa de Empodérate, tú puedes. Y bueno, como saben, estas entrevistas las llevamos a cabo en inglés por la naturaleza de nuestro invitado que nos acompaña el día de hoy desde Holanda. So be very welcome. How are you? I'm going to present our guest today. His name is Vincent Rutgers, and we are also with Adriana Rodríguez, founder of Empodérate, tú puedes. That means, Vincent, empower yourself, you can do it. Okay, so I'm going to make an introduction of our guest today. He graduated in business strategy and production process optimization, and initially working for global manufacturing companies like Texas Instruments, Philips, and AT&T Network System. For the past 25 years, he has been working with major companies as well as respected management consultant. Right now, these days, he works as a global leader in industrial product and construction at Deloitte. So be very welcome, Vincent. Good day, how are you?
Thank you, Paula. I'm very fine. Happy to be here.
So we're so pleased and honored that you're here with us today. And Adriana, how are you? Nice to see you.
I'm fine. I'm very pleased to have Vincent Rutgers with me. You know, I met Vincent around 31 years ago. We were sharing an office together when we were working together in AT&T, and since then we know each other, and we have followed each other's careers. So it's a great honor to have Vincent in our program.
Thank you.
Yes, it is. So Vincent, we want to start with you as an expert in this area, and mostly, as you know, or as we shared with you, we work with entrepreneurs, helping them to do this digital transition and start developing this digital transactional businesses. So in these matters, how do you see, or how long do you think will it take to this economy to recover? And how do you see all this digital transformation and developing these days?
Thank you. Well, that's a good question. It's also somewhat having to look into a glass ball, how long the current crisis will last. Of course, I wish everyone could tell me that, because a lot of my clients in my industry are affected by that. But that's a good point. When you look at companies that are adapting all sorts of digital ways of working. Some companies were already further ahead than others, adapting new ways of working, whether it was in administration, whether it was in the way they manage their employees, or whether it's in manufacturing and supply chain. But I think the current COVID crisis actually showed that while everyone had to work remotely, that a lot of these things actually have to be done by everyone, and have to be done a lot quicker. So where 6 months ago you would discuss with clients about transforming to digital, and they would be somewhat reluctant because change is not something everyone likes to do. Having worked 3-4 months at home now, they realize that it is actually not so bad, and there's a lot of benefits to working in a different way. So what I expect now is that the digital way of working, whether it's remotely or whether it's using different applications and tools and in companies will actually go much faster now than everyone thought a month ago. Sorry, half a year ago. So I think that it has been a really important growth platform for companies and entrepreneurs as well. If you're able to adapt quickly to this, you can actually have a advantage over others that have more difficulty doing that. And if I look at it, I mean, just recently I have been talking with experts, around the world. In my role, I have a global function, and you could have seen with the upcoming COVID-19 crisis that in countries like China, which were much more earlier affected, where factories had to close and people were sent home. It was probably a month and a half before any other country was doing that. So I did calls with different countries about how they're adapting now after COVID. Some countries have restarted already. And you do see a lot more now companies pick up digital capabilities and digital ways of working. And that is, I think it's interesting too. It's not yet clear where that will all lead to, but for me, I think it's an interesting step that these companies have already picked that up and working remote. And there's so many examples of companies that have done things quick. Just imagine all these corporations that had to close their annual books. They had, of course, auditors and others coming over the floor in a normal way, but now they had to do it all remotely, right? And it was always considered to be somewhat complex, but now if you had no choice, they realized that a lot of that was possible and actually was doable without a lot of delays, using a lot of digital tools and ways of working. And that's just one example. There's a lot more examples of companies that have found different ways to do things quicker. And whether it's in supply chain or in manufacturing, that's where I'm kind of looking at. And going forward, looking at the COVID implications, factories will have to adapt. Right? You cannot just have the same workspace with people sitting close to each other for quite some time, unless we discover a vaccine quickly. So factories have to adapt and applying tools, whether it is making sure that people don't come sick to work or optimizing, their production at their company using, for example, ways of measuring someone has a fever using heat mapping tools and setting up the factory completely different because you need to have that distance to other colleagues, right?
So Vincent, what do you see the new trends in manufacturing to apply to the COVID?
Well, it's not so much new trend. It's more a trend that was already there. The whole transition to smart manufacturing. But I think it will go faster now, and companies will adapt quicker than they had thought. The change management aspect is also, picking up much quicker now that everyone realized there's an advantage of working remotely instead of, having to say, well, I need to be in an office or in a factory, otherwise I cannot do my work. And we now have all seen that that's possible, right? And so the whole move to smart manufacturing, the use of IoT, AI, and other ways of optimizing, the whole production side of companies will only go faster in the near future.
I want to ask you a question regarding what you're saying. So we are all seeing that we can all work from home. We also seeing that there is no choice. We also have to be all digital, even for the micro companies. But how do you see in the big corporation or in the manufacturing, in the construction companies, how do you see now the relations between managers and employees affected by this new situation of working from home? How do you see the effects in your own private life and in your own private space? How do you guys see the changes affecting and with your customer?
For myself, I find it efficient to work this way. As this kind of work that I'm doing is already often on the road, and to connect with people and teams of people through digital ways of digital tools. So for me, it's not so different, other than that I'm not traveling a lot. But when you look at companies with people that are not at the office, it suddenly creates a lot of new challenges. Some companies were prepared for it, and I'm lucky to work for a consulting firm, so they kind of are used to working remotely and flexible with laptops and pretty advanced tools. But there's plenty of companies that suddenly realize that sending people home, that people that were normally working on a central IT system, suddenly they didn't have laptops. So what do you do, right? And people were sent home. Also, managers and companies had to make that big leap of putting that trust in people. Right? I send you home, but is he really going to do something? Right? Is he really going to deliver that work that I thought he would be doing? And what people, I can't, of course, discuss it or say that for everyone, but what I think the general experience is that people actually are working more efficient, and people see the benefit of combining that working from home, being close to family, with doing the work that you normally do. I think there's some challenges when you look at. Of course, what you see right now, in case you have to, fire people, right? It's not so easy to do that just remotely. It's very unfriendly and pleasant as well. The same for review meetings with people, but you start to get used to doing that, and I've been in many of them now. It's just getting used to doing that, and it's making use of tools that support that. Zoom is a very handy tool. We used to use Skype before, or Microsoft's tools for connecting and working together. It's all sorts of advantages of having these applications for our teams to use. And I think
absolutely,
it's getting people to of course, not everyone has that experience with it, so you need to make sure that people know how to work with that. They see the benefits of that, and actually use these kind of social networks to connect much quicker to a much larger group. Interesting aspect that you see with companies now also, that you don't have to have people all live close to the office or live close to the factory. There's companies now that they need experts from, say, everywhere in the country. They now can hire these experts, and it doesn't matter if they live in another state or another country. They can contribute from wherever they are, and that creates a whole new, global work team, I would say.
Yeah. So let's discuss a little bit about that. You work, your expertise right now is to provide support in the area of manufacturing and construction. How did you see construction going forward? Are we gonna see these big shopping centers, big buildings, or are we gonna be moving to the countryside more with having chickens and pigs around us?
It's an interesting question. Yeah, it's a bit glass ball looking if you want to predict where construction is going to, right?
In your feeling, because I mean, at the moment, all the shopping centers are kind of empty. I live in Yucatan, in Mexico now, yes. And in the last year, they built around 5 large shopping centers. And then, boom, the COVID, And now, I mean, all the investment that went into all the people who put all the money to create those big areas, this big complex, and then they even created a city, an area where people can live, and then the offices in the back, and so But now, like you're saying, we can live in any mountain we want, next to the sea or wherever, because the borders are not the limits. So we don't need passports anymore.
No, and that's funny that links to that earlier question you had, that how quickly are these companies adapting that, right? Probably a year ago, if you'd said your whole workforce works remotely and from different countries, people would think you're crazy, right? And now actually people see that as a possibility. There's companies that are already basically telling everyone to stay home till January, and we'll see after that. It is I think it's interesting to see how quickly this has now changed, and I think in construction, I mean, you mentioned one thing on the shopping center. Just think about office space. Offices in the last 10 years, they all went from having small rooms to open office spaces where people use flexible work locations. That doesn't really go well with the whole COVID regulations, right? So how do you deal with that? Does that mean no one's going to build an office for some time, or do we go back to small office space instead of having this very open, flexible space? And you start seeing the effects of that in companies that are now just in the process of having their employees going back to the office. That there's quite some challenges, and if I just look at some of my clients or companies I work with, if you just assume that you can bring, looking at the space you have for working, bring back 25-30% of the people in that office space. You also have constraints on the number of elevators. You can, suddenly you can only put 4 people in an elevator instead of 25, and you have to have people go by train and bus to the office, which suddenly there's only 15 people in the bus instead of 50, right? And all these questions, if you think of all of that, it makes it very difficult for people to go back to an office to work there, because of normally you want to go back and meet your colleagues there, but you're not even sure if they're going to be there because there's only so few people that can do that. So companies will have to think about that and adjust to that as well, and what that means for construction, and for building new office buildings. There will be, of course, office buildings, but maybe the role of an office building will be different. Maybe you're not working there, but you're just there to meet, right? You meet your colleagues or your teams or your clients.
Mm-hmm. So but we also need more space for younger people, the students, to live, so maybe some of those, a lot of those working spaces and shopping centers can be converted on homes, and so, or even for older people, so with beautiful inside parks already, they are already there in the shopping centers. So so let's move on a little bit. So where do you see some of the critical areas when you talk to your customers about what to do next? I mean, how do you do planning now? I mean, it is quite tough at this moment to think about planning and strategy and etc.
It is, and it was already challenging if you think about the whole digital transformation of companies in the industry. But if you just focus on that, and we'll talk about the COVID implications. But companies that were looking at transitioning to digital were already looking at a couple challenges. To be successful with digital, you require different skill sets, right? Everyone's looking at these millennials that can do it all, but there's only so many available, in some countries more than others. But there is not a lot of people available that know all these tools and know all these skills. So those are the ones that everyone wants to have, right? And at the same time, you have a workforce in your company that may not have all the right skills, right? And how do you deal with that? And that whole future of work I think is a current topic, and it's quite important for companies, right? I've had discussion. You just take a factory. You can easily replace everything with robots in a factory, but is it really a solution to send everyone home? Is that ultimately you'll have a lot of people sitting at home and a factory full of robots? But there's a lot of social aspects, and I think that becomes more and more important now. That people start questioning, is it really the way forward? And if so, what does that then mean? And how do we deal with that? The same as what I said about hiring young people with the right skills. You have older people that may not have the right skills, but maybe they can be trained in other things, right? That they never thought of. And how do you know which person can be trained in what? And how do you develop these people? I mean, that is the challenge, I think, for a lot of companies now looking at, this whole transition to doing business digital is, how do you reskill your current workforce? How do you bring talent in? And how do you, change your organization into adapting that and become a flexible environment? Because we've seen that now in the last few years is that, nothing is fixed. Like, that you could, in a manufacturing company make something for the last 100 years the same way. It's not going to be the same for the next 100 years. With COVID, you now see that I would say the last 3-4 months with this crisis, it's becoming even something that companies have to adapt even quicker to. You have to be very flexible. If you're in a retail company, you see that pretty much everyone has now gotten accustomed to buying online. What does that mean for if you run a retail shop, right? What does it mean if you're in a shopping mall? Is that still going to be the same? Is it still a store full of a lot of stuff, or is it a meeting place with clients? Or how do you have to really think about that, because people, I think that's the good and the bad side, I think, of the past 3-4 months that we have been working and sitting at home, is that people have really gotten accustomed to doing these things differently and ordering groceries from home and ordering pretty much everything from home. And they see that it's very doable and not so difficult. And I think for companies to have to quickly adapt to that, because going back to what it was is probably not really a realistic scenario.
So will you go back to traveling every week?
Well, sometimes I think it would be nice, but no, I think also for international roles like this, that will be different. I think we also have seen that many of these meetings, you could probably do it by Zoom much quicker and more efficient. And there are some areas, sometimes you have meetings with clients that you probably could do more efficient with actually doing face-to-face. Sometimes you talk about other topics than just, I think, doing a Zoom call is often very focused, right? It's very, very much to the point. You don't just call the colleagues just to chit-chat for half an hour and just catch up over a cup of coffee, right? Which you normally would do in the office, right? That's also an important aspect from working, whether it's to catch up with people and have a coffee, talk about kids, talk about your house or whatever happened to you. And you don't see people, well, in my experience, they don't do that using a Skype call or a Zoom call.
I would like to ask you one interesting question about this. I've been thinking a lot about this. You and I worked when we used to make big bids, competing with each other to win some big multi-billion contracts,
Mm-hmm.
How would you compete now? Because you cannot really go and visit and do the sales. I mean, and if some of the new people, you might not even know those people. Everything done virtually. So what is the role of the salesman here? Is it no longer there? It's all gonna be electronic bids and that's it.
Yeah, you hope not, but no. So far, I think a lot has still is about interaction via Zoom, via Skype. That still works, but there's some areas of
know the person,
selling.
But when you don't really know the person, Vincent, to really compete for big things like this, it's going to be tough for this
It's going to be much more difficult to do that. Yeah, and if it is with a familiar group, it's easier. But if it's a new person, yeah, you're right. I mean, how do you build up trust? But saying that, we'll probably, if we're 4 months further, we'll have found a way to adapt to that as well. Yeah, because we have no choice, right? We'll have to sell projects. We have to sell business. Companies will have to sell business, and it's not always possible to fly over or to have a dinner and do a meeting.
So saying that, what are the things that we no longer need in business? What are the things that we no longer need and we still can get away with, or or even better?
Things we don't really need. Well, yeah, I think there's something to be said for a number of these business trips and large conferences that you tend to organize, that where a lot of people come together. There's different ways of doing that, right? To address large groups, instead of flying 500 people to a location for a big seminar, you could probably do it online and reach the same group of people in the same fashion, right? And of course at a lot less cost. I think companies have started to realize that and a lot of expenses in travel and meetings actually something that they can do without, and the last couple of months have shown that. And if a company is doing well through this period, why go back, right? Of course, there's companies that are struggling right now, but it has to be also linked to bigger things. Like if I look at different industries, if you're in, with the whole crash of the oil price, if you're in an oil and gas business, and your clients are in there, it's more challenging than if your client is in the medical sector, right, where there's a lot of demand for equipment. And the same goes for companies that are in hospitality or in the airline business, and then companies that sell airplanes to these airline companies. Those are not. It's not impossible, but it's just more challenging than it has been, right? And so right now I see a lot of segments and clients that are doing quite well, where there's quite a lot of demand in the market, and there's others that are clearly affected, and they have to rethink about their strategy going forward. But then again, every crisis, I think it was a good point that I picked up from my Chinese colleagues, that every crisis has why waste the crisis, right? So you can come out of this as a winner as well. How can you take advantage of the current situation versus your competitors?
Absolutely. I mean, I worked for a Chinese company for many years, and I love really how they see a crisis. So what, talking about them, they always find ways to emerge, reinforce. Yes.
Yep.
So what are the skills that you're seeing that we will see us getting out of this, emerge, more reinforce,
Well, I think the key requirements, I think, for people are, it's a broad set of skills, but adapting to a flexible environment where things are not as fixed as they used to be, like where people working 50 years in the same job, that's probably not going to happen anymore. People will also have multiple careers and will have to adapt to that as well. That suddenly, your job may not be relevant anymore, but that doesn't mean that you're not relevant anymore. And how can you reapply your skills and maybe add to that? So flexible mindset, and I think it's going to be really important. Of course, being computer literate will help, but it's not, of course, necessary for everything. But it is the adaptability to different ways of working is, I think, key for people, and having that skill is going to be important.
How do you see empathy in all this?
I think that's still it's going to be. I think it's going to be really important. I mean, it becomes otherwise. You have a work environment. Are you okay?
Yeah. Sorry, my computer fall down on me. My phone. It moves. Right. It moves. What do you say? Is quite important. So it's really important. God is talking to us.
All right, that's a good one. No, but I think in the work environment, you have to be able to adapt to that to that change, and it is going faster. It's going to be different. Yeah, I do think so, and so I just going back to your earlier point, because I think you dropping your camera sort of threw my story off as well. But
purpose, but it works.
No, I think people will have to adapt to that. Have to learn these. Have to be willing to learn things. Like the story. You came out of high school or out of a trade school or out of a college and think that the next 35 years will be fine. You don't have to study anymore. That is something that is not going to apply. You need to go back. You have to constantly adapt and develop yourself.
Let me introduce back Paula into the discussion. Paula and I have been working quite hard on the vision and the strategy of we call it ETP, and to make it short for Empodérate, Tú Puedes. And we are trying to bring people first into digital. A lot of the people that are our members are people who have never put themselves into a digital society. You and I are at the top of the scale, together with Paula. But then we have people who are, for us, what we're trying to do in Empodérate is some social impact to help them, because now there is no way that you can live outside the grid. Well, you can if you have the chickens and the vegetables and you don't care, but it might be nice. But if you are in the grid, you do need to be part of the digital equation, yes. And we see a lot of digital divide, and now with the transformation, the digital transformation, the artificial intelligence, the robots that you mentioned, it will be even more. And what you just also mentioned, that you and I subscribe a lot to keep learning, to keep developing, to keep transforming ourselves, including Paula. So how do we, from the big companies, the managers, leaders like us, how do we do something not to have this group of very vulnerable people, to not to have this digital divide? What can we do as leaders, as companies, as governments, economies, to avoid this big disruption? When you and I started in telecoms and IT, we saw this digital divide, but now I see the digital divide, even when we say it's getting closer, I feel that it's getting even wider. What do you think about that, Vincent? And what do you recommend to people like Paula and me and our members?
No, but I agree with you, and I think that is true that so many people don't have the, even access to developing those capabilities, right? So there's a big role for governments, for even local government, to help people develop usable skills, right? Not everyone has to be the expert in AI, but you have to be able to understand what simple things, even like the internet is, right? And what that mean, what you can do with that, and what that would mean for you as far as learning things, because everyone who is able to understand and work with the internet will also be able to get himself familiar with a lot of training and development that's available on that. But that first step is going to be key, and then access to the internet is already a step before that, right? You need PCs, you need a network for people that they can access to. Not everyone will have PCs at home or have a useful network, and that's something you see in this current period of people having to work from home. You can't Skype with every country simply because they don't have the network with the sufficient bandwidth to handle that. Right, and not everyone can work from home simply because that part of the city didn't have a wireless network or a Wi-Fi network. So that's those things will have to be local governments and central governments will have to play a major role into making sure that people have access to that as step one, and then making sure also that people will have access to training or ways to develop themselves that are pretty low, with pretty low barriers, right? It's there's so many people that think anything online is scary, right? And how do you make that easy for them to to get on there and and get yourself familiar, and you start, I guess very, very basic, right? And some people will have to pick that up quicker when they are in a work environment that requires that from them, but not everyone is in that situation.
Regarding that matter, I wanted to add something. Don't you think that these days, with all this pandemia issue, all the digitalizing must be humanized in some way? Because, as you say, this is a matter of technology and governments to deal with, but also all the platforms regarding this matter that you're talking about need to develop different kinds of approach to get to these people.
Yeah.
And what do you think about this, to human technology?
Good point that you're making that. I mean, it is essential, I think, if you want to attract people and include them into this, you need to make the barriers for them to participate very low. And if it is very technical and very advanced, it's not going to be. So how do you bridge that? Whether that's through a humanized interface, or whether it is through other ways to lower the barriers. But that's the only way you can get people to cross that line, right? And maybe even simple things like you stimulate that through some local sessions for, I've seen it in some countries as well, where you organize just basic internet training for elderly people, right, who tend to be scared to go online because they've read these things that if you go online, people will steal your money, right, and sort of hack your credit cards, and and that's, and therefore they don't go on the internet, and that is something you can already find ways to help people. But it is a lot of change. I mean, every change always is about people, right? Because you can always develop tools, you can always develop processes around it, but ultimately, if you don't get the people involved and get them to participate and to work, it's not going to be successful.
Exactly, because that's like a particular niche that many companies these days need to look after.
I agree.
Like, and in our group, that's exactly what we do. Like, put together little groups of people with different expertise to catch the ones that are out of this circle and put them in. And we are doing this with every Spanish-speaking people in different countries. We have groups. So that's exactly what we're trying to do. And that's why we want to talk with people like you, people that are, like Adriana said, up in the chain, so they can be sensitive about these particular needs that we see from people that even upload a picture scares them. So
I agree.
And there are a lot of millions of persons in this situation.
No, but I agree. But it even, there's also a lot of places in this world that where people have, simply cannot read, right? They have a literacy problem, and just putting them behind a computer doesn't solve that. So how do you create an interface for people that that have difficulty reading? But people often are embarrassed to admit that, so they're not going to say that. So that means that you can train them, but it's not going to be successful if you. And so the interface will have to be in such a way that these people are not scared off, right? And actually do participate. Whether it's a voice recognition could be already something, right? If you're able to say something, show me the site of this or that company, and the computer does that, it suddenly have already made it easier if it's someone who has to type it in and has no idea how to do that, right? And of course, there's other ways to make that whole human interface a lot more interesting and simpler. But yeah, it's going to be, you're right, on an earlier point as well. It's important that we keep everyone involved. And empathy, as you asked, Adriana, is going to be crucial. You know, we had that discussion in the IoT World Congress earlier, I think it was last year. And, you know, this is all about computer interfaces, right? And really, really, you know, interesting topics, but it was always a gathering of, you know, I would say techies, right? People that having great ideas that tell that to other people that think great ideas are great. But it was the first time that there was a whole discussion in a forum about the social aspects of all of this, right? What does it mean? You know, I mentioned the one earlier about, you know, replacing a whole factory with robots and sending everyone home, but that's not really a problem, a solution, right? Because then you have, you know, a lot of people sitting at home and a factory that makes things without anyone employed. So you need to consider all the social aspects and make sure that people participate, you know, through change management, through training, through you know, making use of tools and applications to actually make them part of this. If you go one step below that, people have no experience in working, you know, online, you know, that it is a, you know, a challenging, you know, question, of course, to how do you solve that. And I think there's plenty of, you know.
Yeah, it is plenty. I mean, I just give you a little example of, you know, coming from the top of one of the most important corporations where I was working, you know, Microsoft, Huawei, you know, and moving to a little fishing village in the middle of nowhere, you know, where, like you say, half of the people cannot read or write, you know, not access to computers, not even access to sanitary, you know, things. Then you start realizing how big that gap is and how much empathy is required. But how do we mobilize the world with empathy, with innovation, with creativity, with diversity of thought, all the beautiful things that we always say in our multinationals, to really have an inclusive economy recovery? So where we see a more resilient future for all of us.
I think that you know, these things will have to come from two sides. You know, one is from the public function to help develop that and put that into place, but also from corporations. And there's plenty of corporations that are willing to make those steps, right? And you know, I regularly come across companies that have those, you know, even in their company policies, you know, where they actually want to make a difference. They want to invest and show how they can make a difference as a company. And not every company has the same, you know, means to do it or the same ability, but you know, I've seen great examples of companies to actually help people in the most remote parts of the world. You know, there's some great examples of, take for around the healthcare, for example. You know, you're in East Africa, and this is one case that where, you know, there's just a lot of issues with women delivering babies, and one reason is that, you know, the women don't know don't know that, you know, where to go if something's not right. Doctors don't know who's pregnant, right? And these are not places where people visit a doctor like you do in a big city. So how do you get access to that? And you see now companies that have you know, these X-ray scanners where you normally do checkup on babies. You can do it on a laptop, right, with a small scanner. It's not the same high quality as you would get in an advanced system in a hospital, but it's a hell of a lot better than not seeing anything. So you have doctors just going around with those kind of tools, and suddenly you can actually improve people's lives that way by having you know, a lot more, you know, connection to people in villages. You can check more often. You can actually connect them to, and some solutions are not always so have to be so expensive or so big. You know, I had in the same thing as another example in another country where, you know, the minister actually said, you know, I have a big issue because there's about a third of the baby deliveries, something goes wrong with the mother or with the baby. So how, that's a lot of, you know, personal trauma, and how do we improve on that? And, you know, the biggest challenge was how do you get connected to people that are pregnant, and how do they connect them to the hospital? And the thing is that most remote areas in this world, everyone has a mobile phone nowadays, right? Even in East Africa, in India, everywhere. So what they did was just put billboards along the road, you know, with pictures of pregnant women with phone numbers and with very basic, you know, very little text on it, because not everyone was able to read that. But just making them, you know, connected to a medical center, that at least they were known, right? They were known that the woman was pregnant, and the woman knew that they could call if something was not right. If you're able to improve, you know, the mortality rate by 2%, you've done a major job, right? And it's not, you know, it's not a high-tech solution and there's so many more examples of companies that think of creative ways to, you know, with minimal investment, with innovation, that to help people and actually make that step and connect them to a bigger world.
That's really, really nice to hear. You know, and in ETP, we just started an incubator to connect these type of young people through people like yourself, you know, to have a voice, you know, to have ideas of where, you know, to get ideas on, then to bring them through our platform to the world, you know, to create some companies. And now we have three young kids who have enlisted into this. Let's see how far we go with that, and let's see if we can create 3 small companies with them in charge of them. So I'm looking forward for innovation, creativity, and connecting companies, you know, so we can help each other, the less developed world with the more developed world, like we are here in the Netherlands.
Yeah. I agree, and you know, and I want to reiterate that point, that not every innovation has to be very expensive. You know, another example that I reminded of was, you know, in rural in areas in Africa or in India, you know, there's not a lot of lighting, right? And light is not just you know, that you can see things, but light also creates safety, right?
Yes.
You know, if you're walking in a dark alley, there's no light, it is scary. And if you're a woman, in most places, it's even more scary. So if you're able to have lights there, even when there isn't, you know, you used to always you needed electric infrastructure. Nowadays, you can put a battery and a solar panel in an LED, and you can light up a whole street. It's not that expensive to do that, and companies are investing in doing that. And this is one example of villages in Africa where they put you know, light posts on the central square with a solar panel and a battery, and suddenly they could light up the square for 4 hours after it was dark. And people would normally live when it was dark, when it was light, because then it stopped for them when it got dark. Suddenly they got 4 more hours, right, of people meeting together, socializing, playing games, and doing things. And you know, the investment in that is minimal compared to what you get out of that. And you know, I come across a lot of these examples if you travel a lot. And I always try to bring it to other places, because this is not rocket science, but you can actually do a lot with things like this.
Yeah, I saw in one of my trips to Japan, I see to clean your hands in the top of where you sit, you know, to make your needs, you know. So the water that you waste for washing your hands is reused for the toilet. So that was also a great idea of the water reusability. So just to getting closer to at the end of our conversation, ladies, women, girls, how do we convince them to move to the top, and how companies like yourselves promote women's leadership?
I think you know, I think it's essential that we make sure that women have the same rights, the same abilities same opportunities as men have. I grew up with a mother that made career at home, and my father was the one at home cooking and cleaning.
That's nice.
So I, for me, that's a very natural thing, right? And I find it embarrassing that if you work in companies, you see in companies as well that there's too many, often even white males that are in certain roles, and I do everything I can to actually give women the same opportunities, right? And yes, it's wrong in a lot of places when it comes to pay, when it comes to job opportunities, the glass ceiling, everything you can come up with, but you have to start small, right? In my role, I cannot change the whole world, but if you look at even the most, the largest countries in this world, it's still very male dominated, right? And
Absolutely.
I think that's wrong. The world would have been a lot better if there would be more, female presidents, right?
Well,
we would not have.
Before I left my job at Microsoft, I wrote a white paper. Paula knows the story about bringing the robots into the board, because I said, okay, if they cannot bring equality to the boards, at least bring a robot who can make better decisions with the data. So saying that, do you ever believe that we're going to have a mix of robots, ladies and men in the board?
Yeah, well, you can never say no, but it seems a bit far-fetched, right? There is, of course, everything you can do with. You can do a lot with artificial intelligence and with robotics nowadays, and you can make a whole scary story of how robots will take over the world, and but there will be, there's some ethical questions around that, and companies will have to think about that. Not everything that's possible is something you should do. Actually, you may have picked that up in the US press, where a number of major software companies were providing face recognition, right? And they were going to start at AWS, and I think it was Google and others that were actually starting with that. But they have now basically, with seeing how it can also be misused, decided that they're not going to make that available in the US to US government until it has been agreed upon by the US government, and has agreed on some, the correct legislation around it, because misuse of all of this is easily done, right? And that, I think you will see that same for robots, right? There's so many ethical questions around that you need to think about that.
Just one question more before I send it back to Paula. I agree and disagree with what you're saying. I don't see humans competing with humans anymore for any business. I think we are working side by side already with the data, the artificial intelligence that we have together with humans. So now we are teams of humans and artificial intelligence competing with other humans and artificial intelligence. So now the question on leadership comes: when do you choose to listen to the artificial intelligence or to the data versus your humans? I know intuition plays a role in there, because to be able to compete for winning some contracts, small or big, or to be better positioned in the market, you do need to use your tools. You do need to use your artificial intelligence. You need to use your data. But when do you know, as a leader, when do you give it to the computer, or when do you give it to the human? Even in the same company like you are working right now, when do you, everybody says, let's go for marketing, let's go for sales, let's go for this, let's go that for that. So how did you, as a leader, a top executive like you are, how did you guys choose right now?
I think the data is supporting a lot of that, and but it's still the human level that makes the final decisions around what of that data is relevant and what is important. But I think you make a good point. When that further develops and we're able to make all that data even broader and assess other aspects as well, it could play an even more important role, right? You can't get away with just saying, well, based on my guts, we're going to do it this way or that way. You see it in handling the whole coronavirus right now, right? It's some countries completely neglect the data, right? And some governments, and and that's unfortunate. Look at Brazil, look at the US. Data is not really important, and we can't. If we ignore the data, or if we don't test, then the problem becomes much smaller. And I think, yeah, you're right. Data is going to drive a lot of that decision making.
Exactly.
But I think decision making is still done by leadership of companies, and not yet by just the software or the computer system itself. But it could develop something into something in a couple more years. Yeah.
I think it's a thought leadership going there. Where do we use our gut feelings, our intuition? When do we use data? And how do we know inside our own organizations where our leaders lack the understanding of how to use the data and how they are really using the best out of their abilities? So we, as top leaders, as top executives, we can really rely in our team, so we can really compete humans and machines with other humans and machines, because that is the world all about in the future.
Yeah.
And that's why I believe we have to live in a new ecosystems where humans, robots, and computers and nations live side by side, because we should never forget our world and nature. Yeah.
No, I agree. But you do need to find a role for humans in that whole space, right? If you are decisions are made by robots and human interface, or humans are reduced to just being on the sideline. I mean, those scenarios have been, of course, being discussed. Or maybe for example, that example of sending everyone home from a factory. It's not just the people aspect, but you don't have income on the tech side, because no one pays salaries anymore. No one gets any money. Robots don't pay taxes, right? So if all the factories were filled up with robots, you don't have any tax income anymore. So whether you tax a robot for doing a job, or you find another way, ultimately people will have less work to do and have more time available for other things, but they still need an income. And of course, you see those countries test that right now. With universal income for everyone is a way forward for that, because there's going to be less and less work for all the people, but they still need an income. Otherwise, your economy stops and people simply can't.
It's really been an interesting discussion, and we can go hours and hours. So hopefully next time we do it in my terrace with a barbecue with your wife and your kids. Yes, and with a nice glass of wine. So Paula, going back to you, are there any questions from the audience? Any questions?
No, we don't have questions right now. And
okay.
I thank you. I want to thank you both for such an interesting point of view of a lot of things that most of the people don't even imagine or don't even think about. So thank you so much for your presence today, Vincent. Thank you, Adriana. This was a very constructive chat with you.
I want one more question for Vincent. So are you going to go on looking for chickens and pigs around you, or you're going to keep living in your own home so you can live anywhere in the world? Or you're going back to America with Veronica?
No. Yeah, well, it doesn't really look like the right environment to do that right now. No, I think fine. I mean, where you live is what you make of it, of course. But yeah, I do miss traveling and seeing places, because there's so much more happening if you go around and experience cultures and people, and they can experience the Mexican culture when you sit behind your screen, right? It's not the same.
Exactly. So welcome to Mexico.
Yeah, it's high on my list. So if I am allowed to travel again, I'll definitely be going there.
Well, welcome to Yucatan. Welcome to to our lovely home in the beach. So, and Paula as well. Paula lives in Guadalajara, so where the mariachi and the tequila is born. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much.
And greetings to Veronica, and really, really welcome you home. Okay, thank you.
I will do that. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you, Paula.
Thank you so much. Yeah, and to everyone out there in Spanish, a todos los que nos acompañaron el día de hoy o que van a escuchar esta conversación después grabada en nuestra fanpage o en el canal de YouTube, no se la pierdan. Escúchenla completa, escúchenla con detenimiento, que van a poder aprender muchas cosas más. Muchas gracias por el favor de su escucha y nos vemos el próximo domingo.
Se cortó. Bueno, bye bye.
Bye bye.
Gracias, Vincent. Thank you.
Thank you.